If you'd told Mike Sanders that a clipboard and a pair of lemon yellow yoga pants would one day destroy everything he held dear, he would have laughed and cracked open another beer. But that was before the HOA came knocking, or rather, bulldozing into his life. Mike wasn't just a welder. He was a widower, a son, a man who found peace beside the creek where he scattered his wife's ashes and his childhood memories flowed like water. That was until Karen Mitchell, HOA queen and clipboard crusader, declared his sanctuary an unauthorized water feature. What followed wasn't just a conflict, it was war. Paper notices, cement trucks, betrayals, and floods that swallowed entire homes. But this isn't just Mike's fight. It's a story about power, land, memory, and what happens when you push a quiet man too far. Subscribe to Real HOA Drama now, because this isn't just a neighborhood dispute. It's a full-blown reckoning between a man and the machine that tried to pave over everything he loved. If you told me a year ago that a clipboard and a pair of pastel yoga pants would be the beginning of the end, I would have laughed and cracked open another cold beer. But that was before Karen Mitchell showed up on my porch like a Stepford sheriff with a vengeance. Name's Mike Sanders. I'm a welder by trade, widower by fate, and stubborn by blood. My house sits at the edge of what used to be nothing but tall grass, dirt roads, and a winding little creek that's older than half the county. My dad and I built a dock there back in '92, more like 3 planks and a prayer, but it held. That creek wasn't just water. It was memory. It was where Dad taught me to fish, even though we mostly caught twigs, and patience. It's where I brought my wife, Lily, on our first picnic, and where I scattered some of her ashes after cancer took her faster than I could say goodbye. Every evening after work, I'd park myself by the water's edge, boots kicked off, pole in hand, and let the world roll off my shoulders. It was my peace, my sanctuary. And then the HOA slithered in. Technically, the Homeowners Association had been around for years, but always on the other side of the development. You know, the land of beige on beige McMansions, plastic pumpkins that appeared in perfect synchrony every October, and lawns so manicured you'd think a bald eagle cried every time a dandelion sprouted. Then one summer, the boundary lines shifted. I got annexed. Just like that. One minute I was the old guy with a nice yard by the creek. The next I was non-compliant resident number 307, under the great HOA regime. That's when Karen Mitchell entered my life. She showed up unannounced one muggy Saturday morning. Clipboard pressed tight to her chest like it might shield her from the horrors of individuality. Her hair was pulled into a bun so taut it looked like a stress fracture waiting to happen. She wore lemon yellow activewear and carried herself with the holy authority of someone who's never missed a Pilates class or an opportunity to judge others. Hello, I'm Karen Mitchell, Community Standards Chair for the HOA. I sipped my coffee, looked her up and down, and said, Mike Sanders. Busy. But Karen didn't come for coffee. She came for conquest. She told me my creek, the same one flowing there for decades, was an unauthorized water feature and posed a serious hazard to children and native wildlife. I stared at her like she'd just accused me of running a meth lab for my bird feeder. Ma'am, I said, that creek's been here since God was a boy. My deed calls it a protected natural drainage. You want danger? Try walking in heels on your HOA sidewalk. She didn't laugh. 2 days later, a blue painter's tape stuck a notice to my door. Violation. Unauthorized landscaping. Hazardous standing water. Presence of non-native species. I'm guessing she meant the frogs. Now, let me tell you something about folks like Karen. They don't see creeks or memories. They see lines on paper, checkboxes, and opportunities to control. I wasn't about to let her or her badge-shaped clipboard erase a piece of my life. Not without a fight. And so, it began. Not with fists or flames, but with one quiet, angry man sitting beside a creek, and one woman with too much power and not enough perspective. She thought she was enforcing the rules. I was about to teach her the land had rules of its own. At first, I thought it was just a bad joke. Maybe some rookie at the HOA printed the wrong template and slapped it on my door. But then the next one came. And the one after that. Violation notices, stacked like pizza menus, Except these didn't offer any extra cheese, just extra headache. Unauthorized aquatic habitat. Standing water conducive to mosquito proliferation. Presence of non-native wildlife. That last one really got me. The only non-native thing on my property was Karen's personality. If frogs counted as a threat, then I guess we'd better evacuate the Everglades. It wasn't long before I noticed the black SUV. It would show up around dusk, engine running, tinted windows barely cracked. Some days it parked across the street, some days down the block, but always pointed at my yard like a hunter tracking prey. I spotted the glint of a camera lens more than once, flashing in the dying light like a sniper's scope. At first, I thought it was Karen herself. Turned out I wasn't far off. One evening, I stepped out with a flashlight and a bag of trash. As I turned toward the curb, I saw the passenger window of that SUV roll down just a smidge. A hand emerged, holding a phone, snapping photos of my side yard like it was a crime scene. The next morning, I found another notice. Failure to maintain visual harmony with community standards. I didn't know whether to laugh or scream. Visual harmony. What was I, a symphony? And then came the betrayal. Greg Walker, my next-door neighbor, former weekend beer buddy and fence post borrower, was the one behind the lens. I caught him red-handed reviewing photos with Karen in the front seat of the SUV 2 days later. When I confronted him, he looked down at his flip-flops and muttered something about just trying to stay on their good side. I didn't say a word. I just nodded and walked away. Some betrayals don't need yelling. They echo loud enough on their own. But none of it prepared me for what came next. It was early on a Wednesday morning, sky overcast, air thick with humidity and dread. I was halfway through my first cup of coffee when I heard the low growl of machinery. The kind that doesn't belong in neighborhoods unless someone's building a pool or burying something. I stepped onto the porch and saw it, a cement truck, backing slowly down the alley between my house and the Wilsons. A guy in a neon vest walked alongside it, clipboard in hand, directing the driver with military precision. I ran. Coffee spilled. Boots slipped. My voice caught in my throat as I screamed, "HEY, what the hell are you doing?" "Drainage mitigation," the guy said without looking up. "HOA order." Before I could curse, beg, or throw a punch, the chute lowered, and concrete poured out like gray vomit from the belly of a beast. It splashed onto the rocks, swallowed the reeds, and began filling the creek with a thick, choking sludge. I lunged forward, slipped in the wet grass, and slammed shoulder first into the dirt. I must have looked like a madman, mud-covered, bleeding, arms flailing, but I didn't care. That creek was mine. My history. My home. And they were killing it. Karen stood at the curb, arms crossed, sunglasses perched like twin shields against decency. She watched without blinking. By the time the truck drove off, the upper bend of the creek was gone, buried under a 6-inch slab of concrete that steamed in the morning air like a fresh grave. I sat there, soaked in mud and silence, staring at what used to be the soul of my backyard. No more dragonflies. No more gurgling water. Just an ugly gray scar. Karen smiled like she'd just won a chess match I never agreed to play. But in that moment, lying broken beside the corpse of my creek, I made a quiet promise. Let her win this round. She had no idea what storm she'd just unleashed. The first rain didn't feel like justice. It felt like regret. It rolled in slow and heavy, a thick curtain of gray that swallowed the sky and soaked the streets. By the time it hit the rooftops, the air smelled like wet cement and old promises. I sat on my porch, same spot as always, a thermos of lukewarm coffee in my lap and a storm in my chest. The concrete scar that had once been my creek stretched out before me, ugly, lifeless, and smug. At first, I thought maybe nothing would happen. Maybe the water would roll right off the slab, snake through the grass, and find its way somewhere else. But that's not how nature works. It doesn't forget. It doesn't forgive. It waits. Within 20 minutes, the water started to gather. At first, just puddles. Then ponds. Then a slow, creeping tide that spread across the yard like it was reclaiming territory. By noon, The bottom of my porch steps were underwater. Frogs, bless their little hearts, had returned. Only this time they were swimming for their lives. I heard the first scream around 3 p.m. Sarah Jenkins lived at the end of the block, a single mom juggling 2 kids, 3 part-time jobs, and a mortgage that clung to her like a barnacle. Sweet woman. Tough as nails. Her youngest liked to chase squirrels in my yard. Her voice cracked like lightning as she yelled into her phone from her flooded lawn. Water had filled her basement, soaked the carpets, and left a smell like old gym socks and mildew stew. And worse? The back corner of her foundation had caved in, cracked straight through like an eggshell under a boot. HOA's response? A friendly reminder, email about proper lawn grading and the importance of individual runoff management. Not a word about the damn creek they buried. According to them, the flood was Sarah's fault, my fault, everyone's fault, except theirs. That night, I opened a notebook and wrote, Storm 1. Duration, 6 hours. Yard submerged by inch 3. Sarah Jenkins. Foundation damage. Street, 3 clogged drains. HOA response, blame and silence. I kept going. Every puddle, every crack, every whispered complaint overheard at the mailbox or grocery store. I wrote it all down like scripture. I charged my drone, let it fly over the rooftops like a silent sentinel, snapping photos of every flooded lawn and failed drain. I labeled the files by date and street corner, built folders inside folders. Because I knew what was coming. I just had to wait. 2 days later, I caught Greg Walker on his hands and knees in his front yard, poking at a soggy flower bed with a trowel and a face full of dread. Basement's damp, he muttered when I walked by, and the back wall's starting to bow in. I didn't say anything at first, just looked at the earth under his feet, soft, spongy, and unstable. The ground was shifting beneath him, and for once he knew it. Greg looked up at me, guilt written all over his weather-worn face. Look, Mike, he started, but the words trailed off like runoff down a clogged gutter. I just nodded. Water doesn't play politics, I said. It just goes where it's meant to. He stared at the concrete channel in my yard, the same one he'd helped Karen photograph just weeks before. His lips parted like he wanted to apologize, but no sound came. Didn't matter. The damage was already speaking for him. And the rain? It was far from done. This wasn't just weather. It was memory. It was the land remembering what we tried to bury. And it was coming back with interest. There's a sound you never forget once you hear it. It's not loud. It doesn't crash or roar. It whispers, like the hairline crack of drywall stretching ever so slowly under pressure. It creaks through floorboards. It snakes through foundations. It's the sound of a house beginning to lose the fight with the land beneath it. By late October, that sound was everywhere. Houses that once stood proud and symmetrical now tilted like tired drunks at the end of a long party. Basement walls wept moisture like confessionals. Black mold bloomed behind wallpaper like some Gothic wallpaper pattern. Driveways buckled. Fences bowed. Lawns never dried. The earth was saturated, suffocating under the weight of misjudgment and concrete. And still, the HOA acted like we were the problem. Karen, in all her lemon-lipped glory, issued a flurry of new regulations. A 12-page packet landed on every doorstep, stapled, stamped, and wrapped in enough passive aggression to make a therapist cry. Mandatory lawn drainage inspections. Fines for improper gutter flow. Warning. Failure to comply may result in enforcement actions. It was like being ticketed for not bailing water fast enough from a sinking ship. Then came the real kicker. Sarah Jenkins received an official notice taped to her front door. It looked like a court summons. Immediate safety concern identified. Vacate premises until further assessment. Karen delivered it herself, in heels, under an HOA umbrella the size of a parade float. Sarah's hands shook when she read it. She didn't have anywhere to go. 2 kids, a mortgage, a job she could barely keep, and now a bureaucracy telling her she couldn't live in her own damn home. Karen smiled like she was handing out candy on Halloween. And that was the moment something inside me snapped, not loudly, but with the quiet finality of a door closing forever. That night, I went digging. Not in the yard, in the garage. Behind old paint cans and a rusted shop vac, I found the blue metal box my grandfather had left me the day he signed over the property. Might be useful someday, he'd muttered, like he was handing me a relic, not a roadmap. Inside was a bundle of yellowed papers wrapped in twine. Original land surveys dated 1952. A certified letter from the County Water Authority in 1978 confirming a permanent natural drainage easement, running exactly where my creek used to flow. Even better, a copy of a state-level environmental protection order listing that same creek as part of a protected watershed. I stared at the documents like I'd unearthed a treasure chest, and in a way, I had. It wasn't just paper. It was proof. Hard, dusty, undeniable truth. Karen hadn't just paved over a piece of my backyard. She'd violated county codes, state laws, and the very logic of the land. She'd started a war with something older, deeper, and far less forgiving than me. And now I had ammunition. I didn't shout. I didn't post online. I didn't storm HOA meetings with torches and pitchforks. No, I planned. Quietly. Carefully. Like the creek that once trickled behind my home, I followed the path of least resistance until it was time to flood. Because the land doesn't forget. And neither do I. It was a little past midnight when I heard the knock, 3 soft raps, hesitant, like someone hoping not to be heard. I opened the door to find Greg Walker standing on my porch, hat in hand, face lit by the blue glow of my porch light, and a whole lot of guilt. His hair was soaked from the drizzle, and he looked like a man who'd finally realized the bridge he helped burn was the only one that could have saved him. "Mike," he said, voice low. "I screwed up." I didn't say anything. Just stepped aside and let him in. He sat at my kitchen table, hands wrapped around a chipped coffee mug, staring into the steam like it might tell his fortune. "I gave them pictures," he admitted. "At first it was just the creek. Then they asked for more, your yard, the back fence, even your mail." I raised an eyebrow. "They paid me," he added quickly. "Not money. Favors. Promised to overlook my lawn grading issues. Said they'd fast-track my fence appeal." Of course they did. But then Greg reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a crumpled envelope. Inside were printouts, dozens of them, emails between Karen and the HOA board. Most were smug little diktats about aesthetic compliance and property value threats. But a few stood out like bruises on skin. Karen had approved over $30,000 in spending on landscape alteration and drainage mitigation. There were no permits, no approvals from the city, just her signature and a trail of cover-your-ass jargon. One email, dated 3 days before the cement truck showed up in my yard, read simply, "The resident refuses to comply. Proceed with containment." Containment? Like I was a spill. Or a virus. Greg looked up at me. "I want to make it right, so I got to work." First, I reached out to the city environmental office, not as Mike Sanders, angry welder with a grudge, but as a concerned citizen submitting a tip about unauthorized alterations to a protected drainage easement. Then I called the County Water Resource Authority, using language pulled straight from my grandfather's old letters. Violation of Watershed Protection Code Section 12.4, subsection B. The woman on the line whistled when I said it. "That's a big one," she said. "You sure?" I emailed everything. I didn't stop there. I contacted Lance Powell, a local reporter known for digging into suburban scandals with the precision of a surgeon and the flair of a stand-up comic. His segments were like reality checks dipped in sarcasm. If anyone could shine a flashlight on HOA hypocrisy, it was Lance. I didn't use my name. I created a burner Gmail, loaded it up with attachments, photos of the concrete pour, drone footage of standing water, close-ups of black mold creeping up foundation walls, old survey maps, scanned letters, the emails Greg gave me, and titled the message simply, "This is what happens when nature is ignored." I sent it to every local news station, the City Council's Community Concerns inbox, and, just for good measure, the anonymous tip line on the state environmental hotline. Then I sat back in the dark, hands wrapped around my coffee, listening to the rain drum softly on the roof. I didn't know what would happen next, but I knew this much. The silence was over. The whispers had become warnings. And soon, the warnings would become consequences. They came on a Tuesday morning, two white city vehicles rumbling down the street like harbingers of quiet justice. No sirens, no fanfare, just the unmistakable hush that falls over a neighborhood when official-looking people in reflective vests start taking notes on clipboards. The first to step out was a tall man with a surveyor's tripod slung over his shoulder. The second, a woman with boots caked in dried mud and the kind of tired eyes that said she'd seen more water damage than Noah. I was already on my porch, coffee in hand, drone case by my feet, like I'd been waiting for this moment my whole life. "Mr. Sanders?" she asked, flipping through a file. "We're with the City Environmental Office and the County Water Authority. We're investigating a possible unauthorized modification to a protected drainage easement." I smiled and held the screen door open. "Y'all want sugar in your coffee?" For the next 4 hours, they walked every inch of my yard, measured slopes, took soil samples, studied runoff patterns like detectives at a crime scene. I gave them everything: copies of the old surveys, certified letters from 1978, drone photos organized by date and flood event, even the email printouts Greg had passed along. The woman whistled softly at the one with Karen's signature approving the cement pour. "That's going to be a problem." I offered a tight grin. "Not for me." By the time they left, the sky had turned that strange post-rain shade of yellow-gray, and I felt lighter than I had in months. The next morning, it hit. Lance Powell's face lit up the evening news, sleeves rolled, hair windblown, standing ankle-deep in water outside Sarah Jenkins' house. The Chiron beneath him read, "Swamped. HOA mismanagement turns neighborhood into disaster zone." Lance didn't pull punches. He laid it all out. Photos of the flooded lawns, the sunken driveways, the condemned homes. He even included aerial shots from my drone, the ones showing the smooth concrete channel slicing through my property like a scar, and the way water now pooled across the entire block like a spreading bruise. Karen didn't take it well. By Thursday night, she'd called an emergency HOA board meeting at the community center. I showed up, leaned against the back wall with my arms crossed and a smile that didn't quite reach my eyes. Karen stormed in like a weather system, heels clicking, jaw tight, clutching a folder of paperwork like it might shield her from accountability. She launched into a monologue worthy of daytime TV. Slander, fake news, targeted harassment, political sabotage. She blamed the city, then the state, then misinformed residents and manipulated footage. She even took a swipe at the media, claiming Lance had edited the drone shots to create hysteria. And that's when it happened. Greg, sitting in the second row, stood up, nervous, red-faced, but steady, and plugged in a USB stick. Within seconds, the projector lit up. There they were, raw, unedited drone videos. A timeline of failure in full color. From the moment the creek vanished under concrete to the first flood swallowing Sarah's lawn. The room fell silent. Board members shifted in their seats. One coughed. Another suddenly found something fascinating on his clipboard. No one looked at Karen. Not even her lapdog, Linda, from Lot 47, who usually clapped at everything she said like a seal at feeding time. Karen's face was frozen in a smile that was all teeth and no warmth. For the first time, she looked small. I didn't say a word. I didn't need to. The evidence was speaking for me now. And the storm had only just begun. The red tags went up overnight. One by one, like warning flags in a battlefield, they appeared on front doors up and down the block. Bright orange letters screamed from weatherproof plastic sleeves. Unsafe structure. Occupancy prohibited. 12 homes in total. Some with sinking foundations, others with cracked basement walls, and a few where black mold had marched so far up the drywall it looked like abstract art. I walked the street that morning in silence, coffee in hand, watching as neighbors stood in doorways with slack jaws and pale faces. Their dream homes had just been declared war zones. The city wasn't playing around anymore. An official task force launched a full investigation into the HOA's handling of drainage and structural safety. Inspectors moved through the neighborhood like a slow-moving SWAT team: clipboards, soil sensors, moisture probes, laser levels. No stone unturned. No crack unnoticed. And when the insurance companies got involved, it only got worse. At first, people clung to hope. "We've got flood insurance," I heard Mrs. Livingston say to her husband outside their garage. "They'll fix it." They didn't. Within days, denial letters began arriving like snowflakes in hell. Policy violation. Negligent modifications. Act of community mismanagement. Every claim connected to water damage or foundation failure was shot down, because intentional alteration of protected drainage isn't just frowned upon, it's a liability grenade. The HOA had signed for the concrete. The HOA had denied permits. The HOA had ignored warnings. And now the HOA was about to bleed out in broad daylight. Karen, of course, didn't go quietly. She lawyered up some firm out of the city with more billboards than credibility and tried to flip the script. Claimed the city had overstepped. Accused inspectors of falsifying reports. Even hinted that her signature on the drainage orders had been forged. But no amount of spin could erase the paper trail. Not when I'd already given the city and county a full digital archive. Time-stamped drone footage. Email chains with her name highlighted in bold. Land survey overlays. Environmental code violations. And a letter from the State Watershed Authority calling her actions reckless and unauthorized. Her lawyer barely lasted 2 weeks. He withdrew quietly after reading the file, probably realizing he was defending a woman who had tried to out-argue gravity. Then came the financial audit. At the final board meeting, held in a half-lit community center that smelled like damp carpet and desperation, the HOA accountant read aloud the hard numbers. Projected liabilities, $2.3 million. Current assets, $17,422. Emergency fund, depleted. Silence. Not even Linda from Lot 47 had anything to say. Karen sat rigid in her chair, lips pressed so tight they'd turned white. Her once perfect blazer was wrinkled. Her hair, usually pulled into a type A bun of doom, hung in damp curls, as if even her follicles had surrendered. She tried to speak. Something about an appeal. About fundraising. But the rest of the board had already checked out, numb, cornered, and ready to jump ship. No one seconded her motion. No one even looked her way. The HOA, her little empire of forms and fines and floral regulations, was finished. Crushed under the weight of its own arrogance. Drowned by the very thing it tried to bury. Outside, it started to rain again. Just a soft drizzle this time. But the creek would remember. And so would I. The meeting was held in the same community center where it had all begun, except this time there were no balloons, no coffee carafes, and definitely no platters of HOA-branded sugar cookies. Just folding chairs, dripping umbrellas, and the sound of rain tapping like a metronome on the leaky tin roof. The air inside was heavy, not just with humidity but with finality. Karen stood at the front, arms folded, eyes scanning the soggy crowd like a queen surveying the peasants who dared question her crown. But even she could feel it. The tide had turned, and this time, no clipboard in the world could hold it back. A motion was made clear, simple, unavoidable. To dissolve the HOA. No speeches. No debate. No PowerPoint presentations titled, "Why You Still Need Us." Just a quiet silence before hands began to rise. One by one. Rain-drenched, calloused, shaking, hands that had once feared fines now chose freedom. The motion passed. Karen didn't speak. She didn't have to. The vote was the final nail, and everyone knew it. Security. Yes, they actually hired security. Escorted her out as she clutched a soggy tote bag filled with crumpled notices and what dignity she had left. Her once pristine home, the Greek-columned monstrosity at the cul-de-sac's end, now sat sealed by the city. Windows boarded, unsafe structure signs stapled to the front door like a scarlet letter. She moved into an old RV parked beside the retention pond. The irony was almost poetic. Karen Mitchell, queen of community compliance, now squatting in a vehicle technically not allowed under the very bylaws she once weaponized. And just like that, the HOA was gone. What followed wasn't chaos. It was clarity. It started with a shovel. I was the first to dig, right at the edge of the concrete scar that once smothered the creek. The earth was stubborn at first, dry and bitter. But deeper down it was damp. Still alive. Still waiting. Then Greg showed up with a pickaxe and a cooler of iced tea. Then Sarah arrived, mud-covered kids in tow, sleeves rolled to her elbows and vengeance in her eyes. Within a week, the whole neighborhood had caught the fever. We pulled up slabs of concrete like tombstones, hauled them out piece by piece, planted native grasses, willow saplings, and rows of rocks to guide the water. The city, now firmly on our side, gave us a grant and some volunteers. Even old Mr. Talbot, who once filed a complaint about my lawn gnome, showed up with gloves and a wheelbarrow. We didn't just rebuild the creek. We revived it. And the first time it flowed again, clear, cold, and laughing like it remembered, it was like hearing an old friend call your name after years of silence. Birds came back. Frogs sang again. Dragonflies hovered like tiny helicopters, dancing above the current. The ground felt firm under our boots for the first time in months, as if the land itself had exhaled. Neighbors who once fought over gutter runoff now passed lemonade and gardening tips. Greg and Sarah built a small bench under a cedar tree near the water, where her boys now sat tossing pebbles, laughing like the flood had never happened. It wasn't perfect. It wasn't polished. But it was ours. And more importantly, it was real. Nature hadn't just returned. It had forgiven us, barely. And we were smart enough, this time, to listen. The note appeared one morning, wedged beneath a flat stone at the edge of the creek. It wasn't official-looking. No watermark, no seal, no clipboard attached. Just a small, hand-carved piece of cedar wood, weathered around the edges, but still sturdy. Someone had taken the time to whittle out the words, slow and deliberate. You were right. There was no name, no date. But I knew who left it. The handwriting was careful, almost trembling. The letters too neat to be mine, too humble to be forged. I found it just after sunrise, when the mist still hung low over the water and the frogs hadn't yet started their morning songs. I stood there for a long time, holding that small sign in my hands, watching the creek run free again beneath the soft light of a forgiving sky. Karen was still around, technically. Her RV remained parked near the old retention pond, now mostly forgotten, half sunk into the soft ground like it, too, was trying to disappear. She didn't speak to anyone, didn't attend meetings, didn't file complaints. Occasionally, you'd catch her walking in the early morning, hood up, eyes lowered, slipping through the neighborhood like a ghost of her former self. I didn't try to talk to her. I figured she'd said all she needed to say. Instead, I took her small sign and placed it where the creek curved gently back into my property, just upstream from where the concrete had once been poured. Then I gathered a few river stones, stacked them one by one until they formed a steady base, and carved my own piece of slate. 3 words chiseled deep. Nature always wins. It wasn't revenge. It wasn't gloating. It was the truth. Simple, steady, undeniable. By then, the neighborhood had begun to breathe again. Sarah had transformed her backyard into a lush garden, half vegetables, half wildflowers. Her boys ran barefoot through the rows like they owned the earth. Greg, as if trying to cleanse his sins with sweat, spent 3 weeks digging a koi pond near the community path. It wasn't perfect, crooked at one end, a bit murky, but it was beautiful in the way only homemade things can be. He called it second chances. No one questioned it. Then one afternoon, Lance Powell came back. Same rolled-up sleeves. Same boyish grin. But this time, he wasn't chasing scandal. He was telling a different kind of story. The kind that doesn't fit neatly between commercials. The kind about healing. His segment aired that Sunday evening. It opened with a sweeping drone shot of the restored creek, sunlight bouncing off the water like it was grateful to be seen again. Interviews followed, Sarah laughing beside her tomato plants, Greg pointing out lily pads in the pond, Even Mr. Talbot admitting the HOA was maybe a little overzealous. The final scene showed me standing beside the stone marker, hand resting on the wood Karen had left behind. Lance's voice came in over the footage. In a world that too often tries to pave over what it fears, sometimes the most powerful thing we can do is stop, listen, and let the land speak for itself. And maybe that's all we ever needed. Not rules, not fences, not concrete, just the courage to admit we were wrong, and the grace to make it right. The neighborhood looks different now. New families have moved in, young couples with strollers, retirees looking for a slice of quiet, kids racing down the sidewalks with chalk-stained sneakers and juice boxes in hand. They plant flowers, repaint shutters, and wave politely at their neighbors. Most of them don't ask about the past. The boarded-up houses are gone, the cracks sealed, the mold cleaned out and painted over. To them, it's just a peaceful community nestled near a beautiful little creek.
They don't know what it costs to make it that way.
And maybe that's okay. But the land remembers. The old sign still stands near the bend, where the water curves gently past the edge of my yard. It leans a little now. The wood faded, but the letters are still clear. Nature always wins. No one's ever tried to move it. Maybe they don't notice it. Or maybe something about it feels too sacred to touch. Like a gravestone. Or a promise. I sit there most mornings right beside it, same folding chair, same thermos, a little more rust on both. The creek gurgles soft beneath the dawn. Frogs chirp like they've been singing forever. And every so often, a dragonfly buzzes past my ear like it's checking in. The air smells like damp earth and second chances. Sometimes I see a kid, usually one of Sarah's, leaning over the water, tossing pebbles and watching the ripples. They'll glance over at the sign, tilt their head, then go back to playing. One day, maybe they'll ask what it means. Maybe they won't. But the lesson is there, even if the story fades. Because what we learned, what we earned, isn't just about lawsuits or concrete or HOA meetings gone off the rails. It's about something older, something truer.
See, people build walls,
Make rules,
draw lines.
and sometimes they forget that what they're trying to control has been here long before them and will be here long after. Law can be slow. People make mistakes. But nature doesn't forget. It waits. And when the time comes, it reclaims what's always been its own. So I sit by the creek. I breathe in the morning air. I listen, not just to the frogs or the wind, but to the quiet knowing that hums beneath it all. The land is steady now. Not because we conquered it, but because we finally learned to live with it. And maybe that's the legacy. Not just the sign, not just the water, but the understanding that peace isn't something you force. It's something you earn by listening, by learning, and by letting go. So if you ever pass through this place and you see that old wooden marker half swallowed by grass, take a moment.
Sit, breathe.
And remember, nature always wins. And sometimes that's the best possible outcome.